Brian Murphy, you probably know him as Murph from Dimension 20 and College Humor, is the Dungeon Master for Not Another D&D Podcast, also known as NADDPOD. As a Dungeon Master, he is funny, he's got great dramatic instincts, and he's really good with his players. On top of that, he is one of the best encounter designers alive. His combats are dynamic, exciting, and fast-paced, despite having a lot of moving parts. On top of that, he does it all in theater of the mind with no maps or minis to keep track of everything. I want to know exactly what he does to achieve this. So today I want to break down two of my favorite encounters from NADDPOD's first campaign. So there are going to be spoilers for up to episode 84 of that campaign. The first encounter we're looking at comes from episode 82, Ring of Violence. For context, the party is level 14. They are traveling through the 9 hells one level at a time, and they've just come to level 7. This level of hell is known as Violence, and they have been separated from an important NPC known as Balnor. He's basically a member of the party at this point, and they need to find him. To open the encounter and set the stakes, Murph does a little bit of what you could argue is metagaming, which actually I think was a really good call. He immediately lets the party know that there are stakes, Balnor's life, and that there's a time limit. They need to find him before he dies. Alright, let's get into the lay of the land. The first thing the party has to do is descend 100 feet down to a waterfall on a little floating island that is populated by a whole bunch of dangers. There are demonic goatmen that the party has faced before. Players know that they're hostile, but there's also these chained up giants that the goatmen are attacking, and the party doesn't know what side they're on. It turns out that if the players release these giants, they will attack anybody and everybody, so they're sort of a wild card in the mix. And there are also 2 NPCs from previous arcs the party has defeated for who came to hell after they died that they'll have to fight as well, a Flind and a vampire. The environment itself is also dangerous. This island is full of sharp rocks and boiling blood water, so the party either has to move at full speed and take damage, or move at half speed and take no damage. It's their choice. And lastly, there's some sort of demigod husk monster that they have to deal with. I'm not really sure exactly what it is or what stat block it uses, so if you know, please leave that in the comments. I'm very curious. But whatever it is the most dangerous creature on the field. So what Murph does is he rolls at the beginning of its turn to see who it attacks. Because like a lot of the previous enemies, this thing is hostile to anyone and everyone. It might end up attacking a party member, or it might end up attacking an NPC. Whoever this enemy targets is not going to let up until either it dies, its target dies, or somebody else really pisses it off. So this section of the encounter is really chaotic. There are a lot of moving parts and dice rolls that have to decide a lot of different things. And in the hands of a less experienced DM, I think this could become an overwhelming slog that you just kind of have to get through. But Murph runs it really smoothly, and one of the things that he mentioned was that he pre-rolled damage before the session, so all he has to do during the combat is roll to see if he hits, and if he does, he just takes whatever damage he previously rolled. And the design is really effective at what it's meant to do. It's meant to dwindle the player's resources and delay them. Because keep in mind, this encounter is not about killing monsters. It's about getting past the monsters so they can save Balnor. So navigating the chaos that is the first ring is really important. Staying and fighting everything is not an option. They just need to get through as quickly as possible. Once the party fights through the first ring, they then have to descend another 100 feet down a waterfall to a second floating island that has a bunch of screaming trees that attack as a lair action. There was also a small group of enemies that the party had killed before. This is hell after all, as well as Balnor, the NPC that the party is trying to save. That small group of enemies is currently trying to kill Balnor, and the party has to defeat them to fully finish the encounter. This section of the encounter is a lot simpler than the last. It's more or less a straight up fight with a small group of enemies, although there are some wild cards like that god husk thing. If it's still alive, it could still come down and keep fighting here, and also the trees are making things more difficult by attacking as lair actions. Once they've defeated these enemies, they can jump down another waterfall and survive a couple more environmental hazards, and then they will be done the encounter. I chose this encounter because I think it's a really good demonstration of how an encounter doesn't necessarily just have to be an all-out fight. Fighting is obviously a big part of it, but it's not like the main goal. The main goal is to save your friend and sort of just survive. There's a bunch of smaller dangers and a couple bigger dangers to whittle down the character's resources. It's also thematically appropriate in a lot of ways. They are in the 7th circle of hell, which is known for violence, so of course there's a whole bunch of people just killing each other. At the end of the episode, Murph refers to this as an endurance encounter, which I think is a lot of fun because it's not just a straight up fight, it is sort of a resource management game. Your resources are your spells, your hit points, as well as your time. And you have to spend those resources wisely Otherwise, there's going to be dire consequences. And that was the first encounter that we're going to look at. But before we move on to the second one, if you're finding this useful or helpful, I would really appreciate it if you interacted with this video in some way by liking, commenting, subscribing. And don't forget to hit that little bell to get notified when I put up new videos. And if you really like my content, then consider becoming a channel member. It's only like $3 Canadian and you get some cool perks. Also, if you do at least one of the above, my dark patron, the algorithm, won't punish me. So please, help. The next encounter is from episode 84, Treachery. The party has entered the 9th and final circle of hell to stop a demonic lich by the name of Akarot from sending dead rogue gods to the material plane. They're heading to the heart of a lich's lair to stop a deadly dark ritual. Rituals are one of my favorite kinds of encounters because you can add a layer of complexity that's kind of like a puzzle game or a mini game. Each of these groups of mages are trying to revive these dead gods and send them to the material plane. But Alanis, the party's NPC ally, has created a barrier to stop that from happening, so they need to do opposed arcana checks. Alanis sets the DC at the beginning of the round by rolling her arcana check, and then each group of mages on their turn need to roll an opposed arcana check, and if they succeed, the god is sent through the portal. If a group of mages is reduced to 2, then they have disadvantage on that arcana check. This is a really clever addition because not only is this a ritual encounter, this is a boss battle. They are level 14 characters fighting a lich. A lich is a really powerful enemy. They have access to things like Disintegrate, Finger of Death, and Power Word Kill. But they also only have like 135 hit points and an AC of 17. I've literally seen level 7 parties do more damage than that in a round. They are the epitome of a glass cannon. So if you want it to survive more than one round, then you're gonna need some kind of buffer. So with the combination of a ritual and a heavy hitter like a lich, we have a really interesting encounter because we have a heavy damage dealer who is not the priority target. Instead, stopping the ritual and saving the material plane is the thing they have to do first, and they just sort of have to endure the lich's hits until they get through it. And it can also make the players feel awesome and heroic as they mow down all these baddies to stop this dark ritual. Another thing that I like about this is how open and honest Murph is about the mechanics of this encounter. All those things I told you earlier about the contested arcana checks, Murph opens the encounter by telling the players all of that information and a little bit more. Again, this is something that could be considered metagaming. But I think with Murph's style and what he's going for with this encounter, I think that's perfectly acceptable. You could argue that using this method kind of robs the players of naturally discovering the puzzle, but Murph's games, especially big boss battles, are really fast-paced, and not being upfront with the mechanics would slow that pace significantly. Most encounters have a very clear outcome. Either the party wins or the party loses, but this one has varying degrees of success. The only completely successful outcome in this instance is no gods get through the portals and they kill Akarot, which I think is a pretty unlikely outcome. So the better the parties do, the fewer gods get through these portals, and that makes player choice and player tactics way more interesting and engaging for the encounter. There's room for failure that isn't a player death or TPK. The stakes are high, there's a heavy-hitting bad guy, player choice really matters, and there's sort of a mini puzzle on top of all of this. This is an absolutely fantastic encounter, and I think it's something we can all learn a lot from. Now that we've broken down 2 of these encounters, let's look for some common themes within Murph's sort of encounter design philosophy. In both of these encounters, killing monsters for the sake of killing monsters is not the goal. Monsters are obstacles toward more meaningful goals like rescuing a friend or saving the material plane. That creates an encounter where the players need to think a little bit more about their decisions and also creates higher stakes, whether they're personal or like world-saving stuff. Time is also a really important factor in both of these encounters. The first one has a hard time limit. Get to Balnor in time or he dies. But in the second encounter, the time limit is a little more nebulous and unpredictable. It's really up to the dice whether or not those gods go through the portals to the material plane. And honestly, I find that a lot scarier than just a hard time limit. And speaking of the dice, they make a lot of decisions within Murph's encounters. Now this is Dungeons & Dragons, so obviously the dice make a lot of decisions, but Murph actually gives a lot of his encounter design over to the dice. Like previously mentioned, the dice decide whether or not the gods go through the portals, but also in the first encounter, that demigod husk thing gets to attack anybody that the dice say. If that thing hones in on a party member instead of a villain, then it creates a whole new ballgame. And I really like this concept to an extent because it can create little spikes of tension and then little moments of relief within a larger tension arc, but also giving up that control can be a little scary sometimes. sometimes. I also get the impression that Murph puts a lot of thought into the action economy of each encounter. A rule of thumb for 5th edition is whichever side of the fight has more actions is more likely to win the fight. So in the fight with Akarat, Murph made sure to make full use of legendary and lair actions because Akarat was really the only member of the opposite team who was doing any fighting. And in Ring of Violence, there are a ton of different enemies, which should put the party at a disadvantage, but because they were targeting each other as well as the party, that sort of evened things out. And one thing I want to quickly touch on, yes, these encounters are for level 14 characters. They are high level encounters, but that doesn't mean these concepts don't apply to every level of Dungeons and Dragons. As long as you scale the power of the enemies as well as the different actions and damage types that they take, I think you can use all of these things even at level 1. So those are the main concepts and themes that I see in Murph's encounter design. But what about you? What did you see that I didn't? Please put that down in the comments because I want to learn all of this together. But I genuinely feel like I've taken a lot away from this experience. There are a lot of similarities with how Murph designs encounters and how Brennan Lee Mulligan designs encounters, which makes sense because Brennan was apparently Murph's first DM. I'm assuming that Murph learned a lot from Brennan because I did too. I even made a video about how much I learned from him. So if you're interested, you can click on that link and watch that video too. So if you enjoyed, please like, comment, and subscribe, and consider becoming a channel member. Thank you so much for watching.